Imperial Church Orphanage is the place where the candidates for the position of saint live. There was also a girl who lived there who was hated by everyone. Everyone was calling Bells a real disaster, not a child. And of course, all the blame could always be put on her because of her bad girl reputation. No one believed she could become a saint. Bells was an outcast in this house. One day, a new child arrived at the orphanage. Diana Barrelot. She was 5 years old. She was also using her powers for good. This child shone like the sun and was the exact opposite of Bells. They say the brighter the sun shines, the blacker the shadow becomes. And if Diana is the sun, then Bells is the shadow in this story. All people venerate Saint Area, who founded this empire. Therefore, the role of the church was undeniable. And the empire built its history on the exploits of holy men. Naturally, the main figure in Area was a saint. She was called the heart of the empire. From the orphanage in which Bells lives, many saints came out of the orphanage and became famous for their incredible abilities. Children born here were considered blessed by the goddess, and each had a gift from birth. Bells's gift was the power of healing. Her gift made her a candidate for sainthood. But things did not progress beyond the candidate, because Diana showed up. Although they were the same age and came to the orphanage when they were 1 year old, Diana's healing power was much more powerful than Bells's. Bells could barely heal the smallest of scratches, while Diana could heal deep wounds, just like the saint from legends. She was kind to everyone, so Diana was idolized by adults and children alike, and people kept comparing the goofy Bells to the talented Diana. It was so unpleasant. So at first, Bells really tried to outdo her. However, everything resolved itself when Diana got a patron. It was the Marquis of Barrelot who had first left Diana in this orphanage, and then felt guilty for abandoning an illegitimate child and took her back. Bells and Diana were both candidates for the saints, but Diana was a step ahead from the start. They were never meant to be on equal footing, so Bells stayed at the orphanage. A few years later, due to an incident at the orphanage, Bells lost her healing power, and her healer's gaze that helped her recognize a person's sore spot was also gone. Bells spent her days all alone. But one day, Duke Callios and his son came to the orphanage. Bells couldn't believe her eyes. She was such a pathetic person, and didn't even think she would ever get a patron. The Duke needed her power of healing. Only Bells wouldn't say that she had lost her powers long ago, for she knew she would be disappointed in her and taken back to the orphanage. But then the girl turned her attention to the Duke's son. He had black hair that shone like the night sky, and eyes that seemed to have a golden hue. The boy's name was Edwin Callios, and he looked like a prince from a fairy tale. The moment Bells saw him, all her worries vanished. She wanted this boy to belong to her, and she said so explicitly. She didn't care about public opinion. Of course, it was very rude and strange in the eyes of others, but the Duke realized that they were just children. Bells eventually became part of the ducal family. She was glad she could be friends with such a handsome boy. Or rather, she thought she had become part of the family. Even when Bells grew up and her status changed, she still couldn't find her place and remained an outcast. The ladies avoided Bells because she was always messing things up, and her reputation was getting worse by the day. Diana, on the other hand, was doing just fine. Her power was blossoming. She managed to cure the Empress completely. Everyone was sure that she would remain the saint of this generation. Bells just couldn't listen to any of it and was constantly aggressive to anything she didn't like. Bells sincerely hated Diana, whom everyone around her was always talking about. Wherever Bells went, Diana's shadow always followed her, but no matter how much she tried, she couldn't even reach Diana. In the end, Diana took everything she dreamed of from Bells, and she even stole someone she cared about. Bells couldn't stand this injustice. Diana already had everything, but she couldn't enjoy it and took even Edwin for herself. That day, envy of Diana peaked, and one of the Crown Prince's aides paid Bells a visit. He proposed that she break off the engagement of Edwin and Diana and take the place of saint for herself. He told her that Diana's family had allied themselves with the second prince to overthrow the emperor, and he wrote a letter outlining his plan. This letter alone was proof of treason, and Bells was simply required to leave the letter at the Marquis's house. Bells was very worried and did not understand why they were entrusting such an important case to her, and why the evidence should be planted with the Marquis rather than handed over to the guards. But jealousy enveloped Bells's mind, and she could not think adequately. She was only glad that Edwin and Diana would no longer be together. Bells immediately went to the Marquis's house, but then she realized that their real plan was something else. Belez had become an obedient puppet in the hands of the puppeteers. She realized this, however, when the play was over. Diana was poisoned, and of course all suspicion fell on Bells. She was immediately arrested and accused of attempting to assassinate the saint. And later they found a letter with a plan to cheat in Bells's room. On top of all that, she was found guilty of adultery. Only later did she learn that the evidence accusing the Marquis of Barilot and the Second Prince had been falsified in order to incriminate the Duke of Kalios and the Crown Prince. The honorable Kalios family, renowned for their heroism during the Holy War, fell in an instant because of Bells's greed. And even as she prepared to die, she continued to think only of herself. Bells couldn't understand why this was happening to her. She felt like a second-rate villain from a cheap novel. It wasn't until the moment of her death that she realized something, that this world was from the beginning the plot of a novel about women's hardships, triumphs, and love. The plot was about the thorny path of becoming a saint, and its title was Destiny Predestined. Of course, the protagonist of this novel was Diana, and every person Bells held dear was one of the characters destined to fall in love with Diana. Bells was Diana's main villain and rival. She tormented the saint in every possible way. This whole world was created for Diana's benefit, and Bells was nothing more than a cog working for the benefit of this machine. The girl only regretted that she had lived a life of hatred and suffering. Looking back on her past life, Bells saw only darkness. But one day something happened that she couldn't believe. Bells opened her eyes and realized she was back in the days when she was 5 years old and an outcast. Bells was sure that she was definitely dead, but somehow she managed to remember the plot of the novel and go back in time. Bells had an excellent memory, and she remembered that some moments in her past life were different from the novel. In the original story and the Kalios family, Nepal and vice versa, after Diana's poisoning, they disowned Bells to protect the family. Bells had long wondered why her past life was different from the original story, but in any case, it was only her fault, for she was the cause of the family's downfall. Suddenly a nun entered the room. She told Bells to copy the entire 10th chapter of the 6th manuscript after the meal, and then she began to humiliate Bells, because Sister Diana had long ago finished her studies and left the church. In addition, she had received the patronage of a high-ranking aristocrat, while Bells even writes with difficulty and is not a candidate for sainthood. Bells suddenly remembered that this was the nun who had bullied her the most in her past life. Not only bullied, but she directly threatened Bells and might even use brute force, even though that's no way to treat children. The nun's cough was still persistent, and Bells remembered that it was an incurable disease. Only this time, she wasn't going to do anything about it, because Bells had dealt with this disease before. Now her healer's gaze saw directly what the problem was. The healer's view. The places that hurt a person are colored in certain colors. This allows the healer to notice and determine the cause of the illness. This is one of the features of the healing powers. Among all colors, blue symbolizes incurable disease. And in a past life, Bells, when she saw this, predicted the nun's imminent death and directly said that the nun would die soon. Only this was taken as rude and even said that an evil spirit had taken over Bells's body. So they locked her up in the penitential prison, respectful of the nun. Sure enough, after a while, Bells was released from the cage. However, when the woman died, just as the girl had predicted, Bells was sent back to the penitent's cage without giving a reason. After spending 2 long years there, Bells gradually began to lose her abilities. She realizes now that it was pointless. Repeating her mistake and telling someone about it, Bells now had to rewrite scripture like Sister Diana. They seemed to have always seen an example of a good child when Bells was seen as a savage. And because they were both candidates for the position of saint, they were constantly being compared. And in Bells's past life, it had annoyed her a lot. So she was being rude on purpose. Only then did Bells realize that it was her actions that were the reason for her benefactor's long absence. If Bells had behaved like Diana, she could have gotten out of this place much faster. In her previous life, because of her pride, Bells would not have done such a thing even under threat of death. But this time, she decided to take a different path and thought she should just emulate Diana. Bells used to be very illiterate, so it was with difficulty that she was able to pass her scripture exams. Now she hoped it would be a lot easier because she was back in time and knew exactly how to do it. The first Saint Arya gave her heart to the goddess to stop the evil that was spreading. By sacrificing herself, she accomplished the miracle of holy conversion. Bells had written so diligently, except it turned out to be terrible. She tried again to rewrite it neatly, but the handwriting was still as awful, and Bells realized that a child's body couldn't keep up with an adult mind. Because Bells knows how to write and how to read, The Duke taught her that, in a past life, and her handwriting was terrible and wouldn't change at all no matter how hard she tried. Edwin tried to help and motivated Bells to keep her going and keep learning. But because of her many failures, Bells really didn't want to try. Her handwriting was awful and ugly after all. Only suddenly the Duke came to see how the children were learning. Edwin suggested that Bells show what she had worked so hard on and how much effort she had put into writing it. Bells, of course, didn't want to embarrass herself and was going to show when her handwriting got better, but he said her father would be proud of her diligence. Bells still dared to show the Duke the letter she had written to him. And the Duke said it's written really well. Bells was cruel because of her jealousy of Diana, so she often behaved rudely. However, the Duke's family was always patient with Bells. They were able to bring some peace of mind into her life. Thanks to their patience, Bells was gradually able to open her heart and accept them as her own family. Duke was very supportive of Bells, for he knew she had potential, just needed to be patient. And Bells was so grateful to this family. She wanted to see them again. Bells wanted to apologize for her selfishness and actions. But of course, back in time, she can't tell them everything. So she can just repay their love and kindness. A week later, everyone was shocked. Bells, who had been the ultimate bad girl, had suddenly changed, becoming a completely different person. Bells made a serious decision to live differently. She has changed, and only now the people around her are beginning to notice it. Of course, it was very hard for Bells to behave, even when things were awful. She could hardly eat the disgusting food, all because she missed the culinary masterpieces at the Duke's house. Bells tried to lead a righteous life, but the children still wouldn't let her do it and made up bad things to blame Bells for. But still, Bells was being a good girl, so she didn't give a chance to lie either. She still had a long way to go. However, if she continues like this, she will be ready to meet the Duke and life will definitely be different from before. But suddenly Bells was brought a beautiful dress, which is meant for meeting aristocrats, and the girl was at first very happy. Important guests had come to see her, but then Bells thought it was kind of weird. No one should be looking for her right now. Bells first met Duke Kalios when she was 7 years old. This was when she completely lost her ability to heal, and at the age of 8 she was taken from the church orphanage to the Duke's family. So now that Bells is only 5 years old, no one should visit her. Even if she's living differently now than in her previous life, she didn't expect to achieve this kind of effect so quickly. The doors had not yet opened all the way, but as soon as Bells heard the familiar voice, everything made sense to her. She had never forgotten the faces of her family for a moment, even seen them in her dreams. Bells couldn't forget the people in whose lives she had brought only sorrow, even though they were her benefactors. Bells had met them 2 years earlier, but she didn't understand the reason for this early visit. The girl hoped it was for the best. Her new life would give her a chance to be reunited with the Duke's family as soon as possible. Bells tried to leave a good impression, but she could not cope with her emotions. She had run this scenario through her head many times, and now she was able to introduce herself to the Duke properly and confess to him that she had healing abilities. Bells had not noticed the sincerity with which the Duke was looking at her before, but now it was obvious at once. He was glad that the girl was familiar with etiquette, and then she met Edwin, the heir to the duchy, but Bells tried not to look at him because she knew she couldn't hold back her tears. Even so, she simply greeted the young master, and that was it. But Edwin sensed something amiss and asked, did she have something to say? It appeared that the emotions Bells had been trying to keep in check were now surging with renewed vigor with him standing so close. He asked, am I not handsome, or doesn't she like me? Bells could barely hold back her tears at the memories of her past life. That's exactly what she blurted out. But now she wouldn't say it and just cried, even though it had been very silly the first time they met. The Duke made his son calm Bells down, though he certainly hadn't done anything wrong. The only one who made mistakes was Bells, and even now she was only making him uncomfortable. Bells was difficult in this unruly body, and with uncontrollable emotions, it was all very uncomfortable. The priest, of course, tried to smooth things over because Bells is still a child. And here's the Kalios family, iron-born, shedding not a drop of blood or tears. For years, this family has produced swordsmen who have destroyed enemies on the battlefield into mere ashes. The current Duke was also known to be ruthless in his youth, but Bells wasn't crying at all because of silly fictions. Moreover, she knows that the rumors are exaggerated and the Duke's family is very generous. The best evidence is their care for a completely useless girl. But suddenly the priest started suggesting that the visit be postponed because Bells' skills aren't that good. The Duke immediately stopped this conversation because he was not going to discuss such topics in front of the child. Besides, Belz was his only hope. The child the priest had previously recommended had also failed. Had it not been for Edwin, the Duke would hardly have been so loyal to the failures in treatment. It was about the Duke's second son. At the moment, the Duchy of Kalios was practically drowning in debts associated with the participation of famous physicians and the use of elixirs from all over the empire. However, the condition of the Duke's second son was not improving, and attempts to rid him of his ailment were futile. The Duke made a large donation to the temple, and those under his patronage sent their forces to help the Duke. However, even Diana, who had strong healing skills, could not completely cure the boy. He died the year Belz turned 7. Diana had come to the duchy periodically until her youngest son's last days, but Belz didn't understand why the Duke's family came to the temple now, if it was still early. At this time, Diana had to attend to her treatment. Belz reflected. Edwin's reaction at their acquaintance today was incredibly odd. It seemed as if he remembered their first meeting in a past life. But of course that couldn't be true, for then he wouldn't have left the day the ducal family was destroyed. The Duke approached Belz and told her that his youngest son was just like her, very well-mannered and of great dignity. Belz casually let slip that she already knew about Joshua. She was shocked that the Duke was going to ask her for help instead of Diana. Belz decided not to miss the opportunity and said she had treated the young master during the holidays last year. In a past life, Belz had used her abilities to heal many people. Joshua was among them, but it was such a fleeting event that she remembers almost nothing. This is her first chance to repay the Duke's family for their kindness in a past life. And now Diana couldn't cure Joshua. In fact, Belz has not the slightest chance to overcome the difficulties and accomplish what even the heroine Diana could not cope with. But if by her actions she can at least partially repay her debt to her benefactors, Belz will do her best. The main thing is to give her a chance. Belz expressed her sincere intentions to help, but there was such silence in the room that it seemed her words were not taken seriously. Edwin said that they are not the ones giving her permission, but the ones asking for her help. Belz was ready to cry again at how kind Edwin was. And so the moment came when the Duke invited Belz to travel with them to the duchy. Belz couldn't believe it. She hadn't even imagined she'd be going to the Duke's estate so soon. So much the Duke believes in her. Belz will do her best to cure Joshua. Before he left, however, the priest called her to discuss something in person and sent the Duke to the carriage first. But Edwin was determined not to leave Belz alone. Covering her with himself, he said to the priest, "Speak here if you have something to say." The priest still insisted on giving her some privacy. After all, it would only take a couple minutes. He was Belz's guardian and was going to give her some advice as his ward. The Duke said it was a good decision, for the child also had to prepare to leave and went with his son to the carriage. But before he left, Edwin told Belz that if anything happened, she should run to them right away. For some reason, it seemed like he was trying to protect Belz. She thought it was just her imagination playing tricks on her, because he hadn't been like this before, when they first met. So, when the Duke, his son, and the priest were called annoying scumbags, Belz, because of her joy, had completely forgotten what this high-ranking priest Dunkeski was really like. In private, he told Belz to pretend she had cured the boy enough and was going back to the orphanage immediately. The priest always said that treating patients was just enough to get them to come back to church again. The priest wanted to show these arrogant scum who really held the power. The priest was a very greedy and mean man. He told Belz to behave within the bounds of manners as always, and to cure that boy just enough. Because his illness even Diana couldn't heal, so there was no chance Belz could help him. From the priest's point of view, it doesn't matter at all whether Belz cures her second son or not. The temple will be in any case in a difficult position if she can't cure him. They will have to return part of the donations to the Duke's family. If by some miracle Belz can heal Joshua, the temple will have to recognize Diana's power as insufficient. This will be difficult because the temple plans to use Diana for steady profit, so they don't want her to lose value. Based on everything, they'd be better off just returning some of the donations. If Joshua dies, they'll just make Belz a scapegoat. Her position in the temple cannot even remotely be called a candidate for sainthood. Belz is just a replacement for Diana, and a defective one at that. Something that is easier to use, less cumbersome, and easy to discard when it is no longer useful. But this time, Belz didn't want to tolerate such an attitude, and she asked what would happen if she could heal the young master. The priest thought it was too insolent, impertinent, and arrogant. He said that Belz would get a lesson in the penance room, like Ishmael. if he continued to behave like that. Bells immediately remembered Ishmael because he, just like Bells and Diana, originally had unique abilities. He had been summoned to the temple about a year ago. However, he returned to the orphanage the next day, completely devoid of any abilities or voice, after being in the penance room. And the priest said Ishmael was dirty, so the goddess took away her blessing with which she bestowed his voice. Therefore, Bells, who has been elevated as a candidate for the saints, must behave virtuously and obediently so that no evil spirit will be instilled in her, and the goddess will bless her even more and continue to support her. Bells had heard these words many times in her past life. When she was in the penance room, the priest kept telling her how to behave, but those hopes poisoned the soul like poison. But they never recognized Bells, not even in the last moments of her life. Bells knew that none of those innocent children were possessed by evil spirits. It was the priest who was ruled by demons, and that was so annoying. But Bells needed to be nice right now, to leave quietly, and then give a huge cause for concern to the church. After that, she was able to quickly head off to criticize the Duke. Bells was certainly not going to let the priest's plans come to fruition, no matter what happened in this life. Edwin, it turned out, had been waiting for Bells, and he was outraged that she had taken so long to arrive. Even as young as he was, he acted like an adult, and Bells was constantly reminiscing about the past. Edwin even made sure that that old priest didn't say anything to Bells. Edwin had distrusted people associated with the temple even in his past life, but the reason for this was never told. Nevertheless, he made an engagement to Diana, who was to become a saint. Perhaps it was because he truly loved her. Bells knew she had to support them for her own happiness, but for some reason she felt a little overwhelmed. A short while later, they arrived at Duke Callios's mansion. Seeing the mansion intact, Bells became convinced of her regression. She was glad to be back here again. Duke apologized for not being able to let Bells rest after the road, but he just really wanted her to look at Joshua first. Of course, he hadn't forced it. She'd agreed to it herself. And so they came into the room, Joshua, Edwin's younger brother and the Duke's youngest son. He has a chronic disease that keeps the blood from stopping for any injuries. Bells was so strange to see the child who died in her past life, but it must be from being in a similar position. Bells warned that she was about to place her hands on the Lord's body for healing, and as soon as she got permission, she went over to Joshua to check his current condition. There were wounds on his legs, and they were quite fresh, but they were already soaked with blood. The blood doesn't seem to have stopped since the wound first appeared. But Bells remembers that in his previous life, Joshua's cause of death was a heart attack, not massive blood loss. Also, through her healer's gaze, Bells saw an orange glow emanating from Joshua's heart. It was the kind of energy found in patients with an incurable disease of unknown origin. Bells had only vaguely guessed based on memories from her past life, but this picture made it clearer. Each time a new wound appeared, Joshua's weak heart worked even harder to fill the injured areas of his body with blood. Bells decided to heal the boy's heart first and then deal with the wound. And so, when asked what she thought about his condition and if she could help, Bells was about to tell the cause of his illness. But she was shocked when she turned her head, because she saw the exact same glow coming from Edwin's heart. Joshua's glow wasn't coming from his injured leg, but from a completely different place, and a faint but identical aura Bells felt from Edwin. She thought deeply about it, and it became clear that it was a genetic condition that both brothers had. In her past life, Bells didn't know about it because she met Edwin after she lost her powers. The Duke and Duchess must have the same genetic disease. However, the Duchess does not have the same energy, so the children inherited the disease from their mother. Bells tried to gather her thoughts. Now was not the time to reason about this situation. She was no longer the same girl she was in her previous life. She still has the healer's eye. Edwin's slight glow indicates that his illness is in its early stages. Bells detected the disease very timely, because it won't take long for Edwin to heal. Except that the problem now is Joshua. All this time the healers have been treating only the symptoms, not the root cause. And Bells has taken to treating the source of the disease before it's too late. The Duke watched intently as Bells placed her hand directly on Joshua's heart. But before she could begin the treatment, Dr. Gordon and Lady Caston suddenly arrived. He was looking for herbs to help Mr. Joshua, and he found some. The doctor walked further into the room and then yelled at Bells because she had allowed herself to touch the young gentleman. Bells, of course, said she was healing him, But the doctor immediately started judging the girl because Joshua's wound was in a completely different place and she wasn't allowed to touch him at all. Bells didn't know what to do in this situation. After all, if she confessed that she had seen the cause of the incurable disease, she would reveal the existence of her unique abilities, and she did not want her powers to be known in this life. However, you have to explain the situation in some other way without talking about your power, and it's very difficult. The doctor yelled non-stop at the little girl for just touching Joshua. At this moment, Madame Caston intervened in the conversation. Belle recognized this woman's face at once. She was the Duchess's devoted maid, and also Joshua's nanny. Among all the maids, she disliked Belle's the most. She was strongly against Belle's trying to heal Joshua, because she was sure that the girl's healing powers were not even close to Diana's. Madame Caston was certain that this girl was endowed with healing powers that would not even reach a fraction of Diana's level, and could not believe that the Duke had entrusted the young master to someone like her. But the Duke stopped this talk after all Belle's was their guest, and he told the maid not to allow such rudeness again, so she apologized. And then the Duke turned to the doctor. He wanted Gordon to trust this girl. You can't just keep watching a child die slowly in silence. Gordon wanted to object, but even Edwin supported his father's opinion, so the doctor had nothing else to do. Bells could see clearly now that Edwin had not changed at all. He was the same as he had been as an adult, straightforward and rational. And so he reminded Bells that she had come here to treat Joshua, but hadn't even started yet. Bells hasn't actually practiced using her power in a long time, and therein lies the problem. That crumb of light on her finger is her healing power. Normal healing power circulates through the body, and it's limitless, like an ocean, but Bells can only summon pitiful flashes of light. That's why she couldn't heal anyone properly in her previous life. However, she's sure she could be useful this time around if she used more confidence. Diana once told Bells that her power to heal is so weak because she doesn't have that much faith in the goddess. The power comes from faith, so you have to pray to the goddess sincerely. Bells remembered it at that moment and thought that Diana was right. Throughout her life, Bells had blamed the goddess for everything. Because she had been born an orphan, because the goddess had given Bells the same powers as Diana, and because the heroine was superior to her in everything, even her feelings. However, Bells now prayed earnestly to the goddess who had sent her back in time and righted all that had been done wrong. So Bells asked for help to cure this child, and promised that if he was healthy, she would no longer hate Diana or desire to get Edwin. In truth, the goddess had already done enough for Diana, her favorite in her past life. Bells had been imbued with faith for the first time, and now an enormous amount of divine energy was pouring over the edge right out of her body. Everyone in the room was blinded. This bright power made it hard to see what was happening there. But Edwin watched nonetheless. He couldn't take his eyes off Bells. She looked simply incredible using divine power, and as soon as the glow stopped, the room was silent. The doctor and the maid started yelling at Bells because the young gentleman was still unconscious, and the doctor went to check his condition. He removed the bandages from the boy's leg and was incredibly relieved because the wound had healed, crusted over, and almost completely healed. Bells was glad she could help. She could barely see the bad energy in Joshua's heart now, and now she could take it easy. But instead of gratitude or joy, Nanny Gaston only rebuked Bells because the boy still hadn't woken up. The woman had forgotten the Duke's words about being respectful and simply insulted Belez, cursing her orphanhood and wondering why she dared to touch the young master. These awful words were interrupted by Joshua's voice. He woke up feeling perfectly fine and didn't understand why so many people were gathered in his room. He felt fine now. Bells just wanted to get excited and go over to the boy, but he had closer people to talk to. The family immediately ran to Joshua. Everyone was so worried about him. Bells realized she shouldn't have gotten involved and just stood in the corner of the room. The main thing was that Joshua was getting better, and the divine power was proving useful. The boy finally turned his attention to that girl in his room and asked his father. The Duke told his son that Bells had cured him, and of course Joshua was surprised. He said she was a clever little sister and had kept her promise. Bells didn't understand what the boy was even talking about. She was so exhausted now that her heart was failing and aching. The Duke began to ask his son what promise he was talking about. Joshua began to tell about what had happened last year at the temple. Bells was on the verge of passing out, and Edwin noticed that she looked weakened. He told her to rest and not to overexert herself. Bells said she was fine, that she wasn't tired at all. But her nose was bleeding and her eyes were blurry. All she saw before she fainted was the shocked faces of her family. Bells could no longer control her body. She could no longer hear what was being said to her, and she could no longer see anything. No wonder she fainted. It was the first time she had used such a huge amount of holy power at one time. Opening her eyes, Bells found herself in a completely different place, but she immediately realized it was a dream. Given the atmosphere around her, it was like a birthday festival. Even without holiness and sacred power, the children in the orphanage had outstanding talents. People believed that these children were blessed by the gods, and every year, on the day of the goddess's birthday celebration, the children showed off their outstanding skills. But here's Bells these days. She was usually missing and no one could find her. During the festival, she used to hide in Roy, a deserted forest, because she was tired of the stares of sick people directed at her. Bells could move freely in her dream, and she walked over to the place where she usually hid. She saw herself and Joshua there, like a memory. Then Bells was caught by this boy, and to keep the place a secret, she decided to honor him a little more. For even then, his serious illness was evident. Bells used her powers as a gift, but of course, then she couldn't fully heal Joshua. Very close by, the voice of the nanny could be heard looking for the boy, so he had to leave. But Bells promised that when they met again, she would cure that great sickness. Only he must keep what he saw of her a secret. Now Bells was able to recall this long-ago memory. When she was 4 years old, she went to the backyard to hide from people asking for healing during a festival, but ran into Joshua, who was lost and hurt. Bells eventually helped heal his scratches. Unlike her, who had quickly forgotten the events of that day, Joshua was looking forward to their meeting and remembering his promise. Bells felt guilty for forgetting, but in this life she was going to cure him and put him out of his misery. When Bells woke up from this dream, Joshua was standing right beside her by the bed. He noticed that she was awake and informed his brother. Edwin was there now too. Bells didn't immediately remember what had happened, so Edwin recalled how she had healed Joshua and immediately collapsed without feeling. Bells immediately activated her healer's gaze, and she saw that the evil energy in Joshua's chest was much reduced. Bells had apparently worried for nothing, and now there wasn't much left to finish the treatment. Bells decided right now to finish the treatment she was missing, but Edwin stopped her. Bells' nose was bleeding again. Edwin took out a handkerchief and immediately began to wipe the blood. Bells said everything was fine and she just needed to get some rest. Everything would be fine. But she didn't realize that she had slept all day. Edwin tried to reassure Bells that she would take care of herself first. Still, Bells wanted to finish the treatment as soon as possible, because if the healing failed and Joshua died, the Duke would fall back into despair, just like in his previous life. So for the sake of the family's well-being, Bells wanted to get rid of this energy completely, but she focused on the energy of the heart instead of treating the pressing wounds. Although Joshua woke up, if the Duke doubted Bells' abilities because of the remaining wounds on his son's body and no longer called her for help, Joshua's heart would never receive proper healing. Bells tried again to say that she could still use her magic right now, but it appeared that the Duke had been sitting in another part of the room the whole time. He heard the whole conversation and said that Edwin was right. Bells needs to stop treating Joshua. The reason was that last year, when Joshua was very energetic, he kept going on and on about the SIS who had completely healed his knee injury in the backyard of the temple. But he wouldn't give details because it was a secret. However, the Duke realized that that very sister was Bells. So he realizes that she can heal the wound on her son's legs, but she did something else, something that cannot be seen with her eyes. Bells began to realize the reason she had been balanced by Duke's family in her past life. After Joshua's death, someone in Duke's family, having determined that the affliction was a genetic disease, remembered what the boy had said before he died, and in quick order found Bells. Now the Duke said that it was necessary to postpone Joshua's treatment until Bells had fully recovered, and he suggested that she continue to treat his son in the future. Bells is finally able to decide how to repay the Kalios family. She will cure the ducal family's genetic disease. But of course, she can't be overworked just yet. Turns out everyone was very excited about her fainting. And besides, Joshua, finally meeting her again, didn't want to see his little sister get sick. At this point, old Dr. Gordon spoke. He said he didn't agree with it. The Duke asked what the doctor meant. His doubts pale in comparison to the girl's abilities, which he, as a doctor, finds outstanding. What's more, he couldn't let the child continue the treatment because using a large amount of holy power would deplete her body. Gordon was fully convinced of his hunch when Bells fell. He went on to say a shocking phrase: "This girl has no heartbeat." The days Bells spent in jail on charges of attempting to murder Diana were truly hell. However, During endless interrogations and horrific torture, Bells discovered another ability. The second principle ripped Bells' heart out, and then for the first time he could call something a true blessing of the goddess. Any wound Bells has heals instantly, and even without a heart, the girl continues to live. If the temple knew this, they would have treated her as a saint from the beginning. But soon there would be a ceremony for Diana's ascension to sainthood. Bells listened to all this and tolerated it. She didn't understand why this was happening only to her. At that time, she was squirming in endless suffering and found only a shameful death at the end. And opening her eyes again, she went back to the time when she was 5 years old. Bells is sure she did, but the doctor noticed that her heart wasn't beating at all. Bells had never paid attention to it, but she didn't feel a pulse at all herself. If she had actually gone back in time, then her heart should have come back with her. But now she was beginning to fear that the heart she had been ripped out would have remained in her past life, and now she didn't really have a heart, Bells thought deeply. Perhaps the reason why she was still alive was because she had been granted the blessing of the goddess, just like the second principle said. Bells was completely confused, but she was able to calm down when the doctor checked her pulse again. He said it was due to overexertion in using the sacred age power, and although the doctor tried to help, her pulse was still very weak and barely noticeable. The doctor said that asking this girl to heal the young master was tantamount to asking the victim to trade her life for Joshua's. So he recommended to stop using the sacred power, except Bells couldn't agree to that. She immediately started denying it all and saying that she was perfectly fine. After all, she knew she wouldn't die even if she didn't have a heart. But if she was misunderstood now and stopped treatment, Joshua's illness would worsen again, and he would die. Bells was so confidently honest about being the strongest girl in the temple, it was convincing. And besides, it's hard to determine the exact condition of the heart without a detailed examination, and the doctor knows this, so he can't guarantee anything. But he was still too concerned and said that next time, if she continued the healing, it would end in more than just fainting. Bells said she could control her power and its flow, so she would be more careful. But if she fainted again, she would take the doctor's word for it. The disagreement between them continued, and the Duke watched and thought. He offered some more thought about whether Bells could continue healing, but if she decides not to give up anymore because of Joshua, rather than her own health, she will have to accept the help that the Hertzen family offers her. Bells said she would do anything to continue healing the young lord. Surprised at how much energy this girl had, he was glad. Asked the doctor to prepare some medicine before he left. Gordon was going to make a recovery supplement, and Bells was knowledgeable about it, so she asked to include more Relius herb, which is excellent for recovery, but the doctor didn't really want to include it because it was too expensive to use it that way. One glance from the Duke was enough to see the doctor. Bells will borrow Gordon's precious herbs for her own sake, and most importantly, for Joshua's sake. Bells has been able to avoid the topic of her heart and Joshua's treatment, but there's still something else that needs to be addressed. Bells suggested that the Duke take the opportunity to check Edwin too. The boy was surprised and said it was not necessary. He was examined annually and there was nothing wrong with him. Bells unobtrusively said that his younger brother is sick, they are brothers, so he might get sick in the future too. The boy, of course, denied everything, but Bells insisted, and the doctor understood her completely because he too had suspicions about it. He says he decided to ask the girl what made her heal Joshua's heart specifically and not something else. Bells thought it was a chance to talk about the real disease. Joshua had been sick for a long time, a disease that wouldn't let his wounds stop bleeding. Even though the wounds weren't deep, Diana's healing hadn't worked, so the problem was something else. So Bells thought it was the heart that was causing the problem, since it pumps and is responsible for the blood, because they didn't know about it. But it was even more surprising that a 5-year-old knew such a thing. Bells immediately justified that it was written in books, except that no one would believe that a girl of 5 could understand complex medical texts. Bells had to come up with a more convincing reason, except that their attention had shifted to the fact that she could read it all, something Edwin couldn't believe. She was able to get out of it. The doctor realized that the heart's protective measures were inadequate. He had a vague hunch that the heart might have been under stress, still too young. And so the doctor thought that if Joshua regained his ability to regenerate, his heart would heal on its own. Bells understood why the doctor thought that, but the problem was that this disease was not that simple, and it was just the opposite. The heart had problems that hindered regeneration abilities, and she clarified what the books say. Such illnesses usually have a land history, so we need to check on Edwin as well. The doctor reflected that it was quite likely, since there was no information about such a thing in the Duke's family. Perhaps it came from the late Duchess's side. Up until now, the doctor had speculated that the heart might have been part of the problem, but after seeing this girl's heart heal and how early Joshua healed right before his eyes, Gordon was convinced. He felt guilty for not figuring it out sooner, but the Duke didn't blame the doctor because he was trying. The main thing was that now the true nature of the disease was known, and there was a chance to see improvement. It's also important to do a full heart examination on Edwin now. At least this way, they will be able to detect his illness before he gets worse. A while later, those happy moments came to an end. It was time for Bells to go back to the orphanage. Though it came all in one day at the Duke's mansion, the temple had already sent someone to take Bells back. Bells had to leave her dear people and would leave again, come what may. But she really didn't want to leave. Unfortunately, the high priest was giving birth to her, and she had to hurry. Bells said goodbye to them and tried to hold back her tears. Although she couldn't cure Joshua completely, she had discovered the cause of his illness and avoided his death, and getting Edwin seen meant he would get the treatment he needed. Bells was saying goodbye to young Mr. Edwin, only he didn't like it, so much so that he even ran after her in the carriage, and said not to call him that. Besides, recently she herself had just called him Edwin by his first name without a problem. Bells, when the realization came, accidentally called him by name, but calling an aristocrat by name without permission is very unseemly. Bells apologized for that, admitted the mistake, but Edwin still said to just call him by his first name next time, no formalities. And he said goodbye. He was with her without molds, too. Bells was fascinated by him at that moment because Edwin smiled. A lot of things have changed now. Bells doesn't know when she'll be able to see her family again. Even so, she hopes it will be as soon as possible. The Duke asked Edwin what he thought about supporting Bells. Edwin thought it was already decided and there was no need to think. Joshua looks much better after the Bells treatment than he did after Diana's healing, which had no effect. Logan, Duke's assistant, said that Diana didn't make things worse thanks to her getting out of difficult situations. Then he was asked how he would explain the fact that Diana's holy powers had little or no effect. It is Logan who controls Diana's donation, so now his words sound like a pathetic excuse. Edwin took the situation into his own hands, and his father was in complete agreement with him. Diana's holy powers did not help. They stopped having even minimal effect almost as soon as the treatment began. As time passed, Joshua's condition stopped improving. The Duke consulted a priest, but the priest said that this power only worked if there was still life in the patient's body. And if Diana's treatment doesn't work, it can be assumed that the young gentleman's life is on the brink. It really scared the family because they were told that Joshua was going to die. At this point, Edwin had to grow up. He was beginning to blame himself for everything, for it was he who had suggested the walk, and after that, his brother had gotten worse. The viscous feeling of guilt consumed the boy more and more every day, even though his father tried to help him and said it wasn't his fault. On his return from the temple, Edwin locked himself in his room and did not come out of it for several days. After a while, he finally came to his father. Edwin didn't have the red eyes and ragged look that the Duke had expected. Edwin had changed a lot in the past few days, and he no longer looked devastated. Edwin came to his father with full confidence and hoped to try again to heal Joshua. After all, there was another girl in the temple with healing powers. His father saw that Edwin's gaze remained completely different, as if he had become a different person. Of course, he had always been an advanced child for his age, but since that day, there had been no trace of childhood left in him. In this terrible situation, when his brother's life was at stake, Edwin began to make rational and judicious decisions. This is a very good quality for the head of a family, but the Duke, as a father, was very worried. Logan offered to summon the girl when the need arose and watch the progress, making a donation to the temple each time. It seemed like a pretty good option, plus the donations were quite modest. Gordon was still amazed at the girl's holy power, but what surprised him more was her knowledge of medicine. Even Logan couldn't understand how a 5-year-old girl could have knowledge of medicine. If it were an ordinary child, it would indeed be reckless. But when they heard Bell's theory that the disease might have a genetic basis, even the doctor immediately sent a telegram to the Duchess's attending physician, the Marquis de Tebron. He quickly received the answer that Joshua's symptoms were indeed very similar to those exhibited among the family's distant relatives. Other documents from the Duchess's family were also due to arrive soon, which would help make some progress in finding a cure for Joshua. Duke thought it was impossible after all, They hadn't been able to contact that family in a long time. The Duke had been isolated since his wife's death and had not even thought about discussing the matter. Gordon offered to take the girl into the duchy to conduct the healing and combine it with a cure that would surely benefit the Lord. However, there was one thing that kept the doctor on his toes. It was as if the 5-year-old could see right through a person with such powerful divine power and sinister red eyes. But even though the doctor called her sinister, the Duke really liked the girl, so he was going to get custody of her one way or another. Plus, this baby looks a little like a cute little rabbit, and the Duke thought that if he had a daughter, she'd be just like that. Everyone was shocked by Duke's judgment, especially his assistant Logan, who couldn't believe that Duke had just called someone cute. Edwin agreed with his father. He especially liked Belle's clear eyes, as pure as her heart. Meanwhile, she had already returned back to the orphanage. The high priest already knew everything. Belle's had managed to significantly improve the condition of the Duke's second son, so the high priest demanded that Belle's tell what really happened. Belle's pretended to treat the young gentleman, but it turned out that the Duke had sent a letter with similar contents. Belle's took the letter and was as surprised as the priest. The Duke wished to support Belle's candidate for sainthood and gain custody of this child. Belle's was very happy that she was to be adopted. Now she understood what the Duke meant about support. But the letter also stated that after the candidate's visit to St. Belz's, it was confirmed that St. Diana's healing of the candidate was ineffective. Therefore, based on the teachings of the goddess, the duchy would not ask for a refund of the donations, but instead requested a report on how the money had been used. Belle's didn't quite understand their reason for wanting to adopt her. After all, they had figured out the cause of her illness, and it wasn't necessary to take custody, just enough to call Belle's for treatment as needed. The priest was very angry. He sternly told Belle's only to pretend to cure the boy, and she did. Belle's had to justify herself somehow. Because of the letter, she wouldn't be able to hide her use of holy power, so she said that she used only a little to pretend to heal the wound. And she herself was surprised when the boy recovered. It must have been a miracle of the goddess. She shouldn't have said those words because something very strange began to happen. A dark purple flame emanated from the priest. He was as angry as he'd ever been over the fact that Belle's had caused him a lot of trouble just by curing this boy. Belle's was very frightened. She had never seen this color of flame before, and the priest was very intimidating. He said that that boy was supposed to die soon, and those fools from the duchy were supposed to be grief-stricken. Belle's couldn't believe that the priest really wanted an ordinary child to die, so he only said to pretend to heal him. Belle's was shocked. How could this be possible? The priest rang the bell. He gave Belle's one last chance, and she still lied every time she opened her mouth. The priest didn't like that she wasn't taking his words seriously, so he said she was holding on to an evil spirit. The guards immediately led Belle's out of the room, and by order of the priest, saw her off to the penitential room to think over her behavior. And when all evil spirits have departed, all the sins of the Belts will be forgiven. The girl said there was no such thing as possession, but nothing would help her anymore. Belle's realized that she would be stuck here again. She was incredibly scared, realizing that she would lose her powers again. The penance room was a ruinous place hidden in the darkest parts of the temple. In fact, the room was not for possessed souls, nor for disciples who needed to reflect on their behavior. This room allowed the theft of special abilities from children blessed by the goddess. Moreover, everything going on here is terribly dirty, more so the priest. This is the unsightly true penance room. Belle's fell into this trap again. Ishmael was stripped of his voice on the priest's orders, and Belle's lost her healing abilities in her past life. This place is very horrible. Belle's tried to preserve her gift at all costs. When it was time for dinner, Belle's got food, but she was afraid to eat because she didn't trust it. The food could be spiked with sleeping pills or something worse. Belle's doesn't know exactly how they plan to take away her powers. Perhaps her healer's gaze is missing because of some kind of medication. Belle's didn't know how long she would have to stay here, but of course, when the official letter came, so they can't just leave Belle's here to die. But a child's body won't last long without food, 2 days at most. Belle's suddenly began to hear some kind of sound. It was very familiar to her. She had heard the same thing from Diana in a past life. It was an ancient language. Suddenly, the magic circles spread throughout the room began to shine brightly. Belle's was beginning to lose her sacred power, something she was very much afraid of. Now she realized that they didn't need any drugs to steal power. This room itself absorbs magic. Belle's had to get out of here somehow. In her previous life, she thought she had only lost her sight, but that was not the case. What was stolen was the very core of her power. the core of her ability. That's why she couldn't heal anyone else. Bells must escape before her strength is completely drained from her. She screamed, begging for help, but she was already starting to lose consciousness. Bells thought it was the end, and she was sorry. She really wanted to help the family this time. Losing consciousness, she heard a familiar voice calling her name. It asked her back to her memories. Edwin found the place where Bells was imprisoned in her past life. He came to rescue her, though he realized it was very risky, and they would be chased immediately. Bells was so worried about Edwin coming to save her, more than she was worried about herself. But at times like this, she just had to ask for help. Bells was able to escape with Edwin. There were some difficulties. Bells hoped that Edwin believed her and didn't think that she had just done that and poisoned Diana. Bells was honest about not trying to kill Diana and not writing a letter denouncing the Duke. Edwin asked her to stop crying and gave her a jar that contained her already heart, which the second principal had taken away. Edwin called his sister careless as always since she was able to lose such an important thing. But this time, he had her heart back. Bells asked, "Isn't really disgusted with Edwin? Why did he decide to help?" Bells cried. But Edwin told her that a true Calvite wouldn't fall to his knees no matter what happened, and you can't get so upset. Bells wasn't an official part of the Kallios family, but she didn't know that her father had prepared the papers for a formal adoption as a gift for her 18th birthday. In fact, she had already become a member of their family for a very long time, so she shouldn't give up because of such a trifle. The guards had already caught up with them while they were talking so movingly. Edwin immediately took his sister's hand, and they continued to run away. But Bells couldn't run fast enough in this state, so the guards were going to catch up to her and kill her right now. Bells couldn't dodge the blow. The only thing Edwin could do was to cover her with himself. In the end, the sword pierced Edwin's body. It was a very serious wound. Bells immediately tried to use her sacred powers to definitely heal her brother, but the bleeding wouldn't stop. Bells was so desperate, no matter how much she tried and put in effort, nothing worked. Edwin saw it from her eyes and asked Bells not to cry because every time she cries, he's like a fool and doesn't know what to do. After finishing this sentence, he closed his eyes and stopped moving. The guards surrounding them already realized that the young Duke was dead. Bells, leaning against him, couldn't hear his heartbeat at all. He had sacrificed himself in an attempt to protect her. Bells loved him incredibly much, and what had just happened was based on genuine feelings. It was as if a huge tree of magical power had sprouted from her body and attacked all the enemies standing nearby. Of course, the sacred power can do no harm. At this moment, the evil spirits that filled the minds of these guards would simply vanish. People called Bells a witch and the Kallios family in fear, but even though she used such incredible power, Bells was unable to save Edwin, her Eddie. Now it was just a memory Bells saw while passed out, but even so, she cried. Someone told her it was okay now, so no need to cry, and Bells came to her senses. Opening her eyes, she saw Eddie in front of her for a second. Of course, it was nothing more than a fantasy that he was alive. But even that illusion was enough to make Bells calm down. A short while later, she opened her eyes and immediately realized that the Duke was holding her in his arms. She also saw the people from the temple who had come to the commotion. Bells realized that she had been rescued from the penance room. She could still see the ominous aura emanating from the priest. This meant that her power was not yet exhausted. The Duke ordered his aide to bring in all those involved. The priest had no idea how the Duke was able to know about this place, but he just found something familiar in the hallway. It was a small bag of herbs from Gordon. Bells kept wondering where the medicine had gone, but she must have dropped it when she was dragged into this room. The Duke, upon arriving at the temple, discovered the pouch of herbs and immediately sensed something amiss. Now he asked the priest what kind of prison this was, and how dare they keep a child here. The Duke demanded an explanation now before his patience ran out. The priest had convinced the Duke that this place was used to exorcise spirits, and last night Bells was still at the Duke's estate. It was there during the ritual that she was possessed by an evil spirit. It was utter nonsense. Bells hoped the Duke wouldn't believe it. The Duke didn't care if the evil spirit had taken possession or not. He was amazed that the temple attendants were treating the child so cruelly. And besides, Bells is a candidate for sainthood, and the goddess has willed to protect those who are weak. Yet the goddess's direct servants dare to lock up a child in such a ghastly place. It was easier for the Duke to believe that it was the priest who had been possessed by the evil spirit. So he happily decided to participate in the exorcism ritual and drew his sword. When the sword blade was already at this old man's throat, suddenly someone came and asked what they were doing. Everyone was surprised because the pontiff, Pope Montanus II, had come. He almost never visits orphanages, but it turns out He was here today to congratulate a candidate for sainthood who was able to heal the Duke's son. However, he was now surprised at what was going on here and tried to find out the situation. Why is Duke Kallios, who was supposed to meet him, now trying to stab the head priest while in a strange-looking room that shouldn't have been in the orphanage? The priest claimed that the room was for educational purposes. He was considered one of the best caretakers of the orphanage, so he thought everyone would believe him. But the Pope ignored these words. He approached Bells and asked if she remembered him. They had seen each other when she first came to the temple. Daddy wanted to hear Bells out. She took this great opportunity to tell everyone what was really going on in this orphanage and in this room. The pontiff didn't give off the same creepy energy as the others. He seemed really nice and really good, so Bells thought he would definitely believe what she said. She told me that this room is called the obedience room, and those children whom the priesthood considers disobedient, they declare possessed by evil spirits and lock them up here. But Bells really isn't possessed by any spirits, and when she talked about it, she even cried. She did not have to prove anything. The pontiff believed her at once. At the same moment, he decided to excommunicate the priest, Dunkeski, and also all the ministers who were involved in what happened will also be punished according to the Holy Scripture. People were just beginning to realize their mistake and immediately started apologizing to the priest, but Dunkeski proved his point to the end. Of course, no one would listen to him, and he was immediately escorted out. The Pope ordered that everything be removed from the room and that the place be closed. He could not understand what crimes were being committed within the walls of the temple. Bells realized that not even the pontiff could see those ancient writings on the walls. She wished she could tell her that the room was designed to strip children of their powers, but she had almost no proof. However, after what had happened, all the horrors going on in the orphanage would stop, and Bells was glad for that. The Duke asked the pontiff to place the temple documents in his hands to give them directly to the Imperial Bureau of Investigation, that they scrutinize what happened and identify all those involved. Bells wondered if the case would be turned over to the Bureau of Investigation and treated like a common criminal. But they might be able to figure out that the kid's powers were being taken away and find who was behind it. The pontiff didn't really want to go that far. After all, it was the internal affairs of the temple. But the Duke said he would soon take Bells under his full guardianship. Besides, it had already been personally signed by the pontiff. The Duke had come back here to get Bells, but knowing the horrors that were going on here, he couldn't leave things as they were. The pontiff decided that this was a sensible decision and he left further business to the Duke, after which he left. Bells looked at him and realized that Papa was a good man. However, the white glow coming from him signaled that his body was weakening due to age, and he had about 4 years of life left. When life comes to an end, death cannot be avoided. But Bells can pray that the goddess's blessing will always remain with him. Bells asked the Duke to speak to the priest one last time, for he had looked after her all these years, and she wanted to say goodbye. In fact, she just needed to check something before she left. Dunkeski had lost his title as a priest, so Bells now called him simply by his first name. Through her recent memories of her past life, Bells realized that he had the same energy as the knights who had chased her and Eddie. Then she managed to destroy them all with holy power in the blink of an eye, and she still can't figure out how she did it in her past life. But now she tried the same thing. Of course, she was doing all this to protect the Duke and his family. By using sacred power, she was actually able to dispel that bad energy. It was now clear that the evil spirit was actually possessed by Dunkeski. He lost consciousness briefly after that. Bells realized that her powers hadn't disappeared. After the so-called farewell, she came to the Duke. He noticed that something was wrong and found that Bells had a fever, so he immediately prepared a carriage to return home. Of course, there was an offer to stay at the temple and perform a quick healing ritual, but Bells didn't want to stay here for a second. The Duke took Bells in his arms and didn't let go until they arrived home. Bells woke up and was already in the Duke's manor, in the very room she had lived in before. After using a lot of energy exorcising the spirit and the priest, she fell asleep soundly in Herzen's arms and stirred everyone up again. Upon awakening, a girl approached Bells. Her name is Tara, and she will be her personal maid from this day forward. Bells had completely forgotten about her, but now she remembered. Tara was one of the few people who truly treated her with warmth. She has many younger siblings, yet she has always endured Bells' every whim and her difficult personality with a smile, saying it reminds her of a little sister. But for some reason in the past, Bells decided that the maid treated her no better than anyone else and was always comparing her to Diana behind her back. As a result, in a foolish act of pride, Bells fired Tara. Only then did she realize how good Tara had been to her. But it was too late. None of the other servants liked Tara, because she always protected and sided with Bells. But now Bells' heart overflows with regret and joy at the sight of her. Things would be different in this life. There's a chance for a fresh start, and Bells is reacquainted with the maid. Now she would value those who had been kind to her more than her own life. After a while, they began to choose an outfit for Bells. The dress was not too lavish, but not too plain either, so as not to stand out from the rest. Now the servants wouldn't be whispering behind her back about Bells' appearance. In the past, her outfits were always disliked, and many even complained about it. Tara helped Bells adjust her sleeves, and that's when she noticed how thin Bells' arms were. She was too small and fragile for her age. Tara hated the fact that the temple orphanage didn't even feed the children properly. The maid might have been angry, but she was near the lady now, so she wanted to take good care of her. Gordon has prepared a new medicine for Bells because she fainted again recently. Even though her temperature is normal, she still needs to take the medicine. Bells, of course, was very grateful to the doctor, but the medicine was very nasty and bitter. She had to take it, however, because without it, she could not cure the young gentleman. Bells was taking the nasty medicine, and Tara was supporting her, making this moment not so horrible. At that moment, Lady Gaston came into the room. She was very angry when she saw Bells, for she had told the maid to send the girl as soon as she woke up. But it was evident that Bells had been awake for some time. Tara, of course, began to argue her case because Madame Gaston had asked that Bells be brought in by 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and there was plenty of time before then. But that didn't bother the nanny, for she wanted Bells to go to the young gentleman as soon as possible. She must do her best to prove her right to stay in this place, for she was only here for the cure. Tara has only known the young lady for a few hours. Still, she immediately started defending the little girl because Gaston spoke to her in a very disrespectful way. But Bells said that Lady Gaston was actually right. Since she was the late Duchess's maid, she was respected by everyone on the estate, and it was best to be very careful with her. Bells was ready to continue her treatment and go to the young master right now. The Duke had brought her here, so she couldn't miss this chance, even though she was sure Gaston still wasn't treating her well. Bells was going to prove that she could help Joshua and everything would change. Before that, however, she still has to endure mistrust and rudeness toward herself. Bells came to Joshua's house. The doctor was already there. They were very happy to see Bells. All right, Why did you call her sister? Even though they were the same age, Bells was still happy about it. She saw that the condition of his heart had not gotten worse during this time. That's very good. Gordon first assessed Bells' condition before letting her anywhere near Joshua's treatment. After all, she made a full recovery thanks to his medicines and herbal remedies. He is not just a pharmacist, he knows everything about proper treatment. Bells decided to make Joshua happy. She said that if today's treatment was successful, he would make a full recovery. But the treatment might be a little unpleasant. So Bells said that if Joshua would bravely endure all the treatment, she would ask the Duke to reward him. Of course, the boy wanted to make one wish and immediately agreed. That was very nice. Bells was already wondering what exactly he was going to ask for. Well, she started the treatment and told Joshua to hang in there and not cry. He promised he could. Bells managed to suppress the main source of the disease last time, and now she is left to remove the side symptoms of the ailment. It reminded her of the feeling when she had used the power on the priest to keep a severe illness from taking deeper root. She had to proceed with extreme caution and care. Bells was very focused, and she had finally found the root of the problem. This made Joshua very uncomfortable. He started to shiver, and his nanny standing behind him was alert. Bells has literally very little left to fully deal with this disease. But suddenly her bond with Joshua was cut off because Gaston had pulled Bells away from the boy. She saw him in pain and even called Bells a damned witch. Gordon, watching this, was shocked at the way Lady Gaston was behaving. She was out of her mind for getting into a serious moment during treatment. But Nanny didn't care about any of those words. When she saw Joshua suffering, she didn't want the treatment to continue. Bells was already in a bad mood. She had fallen hard and hit herself. But most importantly, she had not made a fatal mistake because of this Gaston. It could indeed hurt in the healing process, but Bells had very little left. In the end, she still hadn't accomplished anything today. Gaston continued to blame Bells for everything, claiming that Joshua had been in pain during the treatment. But Joshua wasn't in pain now at all. For some reason, areas of his body began to itch. And then, when he ripped off all the band-aids, everyone was shocked because they saw that his wound was completely healed. It was a real healing. Bells was glad that her treatment was helping Joshua, but now Lady Gaston needed to be convinced. Bells said that she could definitely heal the young master. His condition had improved greatly now, but they had only passed the first stage. The treatment must continue, and in this process, a stronger concentration on the holy energy would be needed. Bells had been able to finish the healing safely and quickly a little earlier, but if Gaston had pushed her away before Bells removed the remnants of her spiritual energy, Joshua could have been very badly hurt. It was really serious and not just some warning. Bells asked the woman not to interfere with the treatment process and not to interfere anymore. Nanny was furious that some girl dared to say that. But even Joshua supported Bells because she was trying to help him, and the nanny just pushed her during the treatment.